Democrats America, it's not normal, part 2. That's our focus in tonight's panel edition of the Preamble. In Biden's America, we have faced crisis after crisis after crisis nearly from the day he took over. The damage being done only gets worse from a man who is clearly mentally diminished. Watch.
The Constitution, the Second Amendment, was never absolute. You couldn't buy a cannon when the Second Amendment was passed. You couldn't go out and purchase a lot of weaponry.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, et cetera.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are?
That's the commitment we made.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The White House had to play cleanup on every single one of those serious and consequential statements, and several others, I might add. Having a mentally compromised occupier of the Oval Office is not normal. Having an occupier of the Oval Office who has to check in with his Barack Hussein Obama handlers to find out what he's thinking is not normal. Joining me now to dig in deeper in part 2 of the Democrats America is Not Normal, former Trump economic advisor and author of Trumponomics, Stephen Moore, along with China expert and author of The Coming Collapse of China, Gordon Chang. Also with me here tonight, former National Security Advisor, I should say, for Trump 2020 and president of the London Center for Policy Research, retired Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Mr. Moore, we begin with you. Americans are facing record-breaking gas prices as Biden and his know-nothing leftists wage war on American energy producers. Here's Biden's energy secretary today. Watch.
According to the Department of Energy has an Energy Information Administration, which is an objective entity that does analysis projecting the prices of gasoline. They say that things might stabilize by the end of this year, but that the price of gas is likely to remain above $4 a gallon.
Good grief. Now, Mr. Biden blames Putin, of course, but everyone knows that this all started well before Putin's war and that Biden has weakened America so much, Mr. Moore, that when some dictator passes gas overseas, America's economy is going to suffer. Am I wrong?
You know, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing, Chris, if we had an energy secretary who knew something about energy? Because it's pretty clear that Jennifer Granholm is out to lunch on this issue. By the way, she and her green energy fanatics, they want high gas prices. They're not trying to bring gas prices down. They want gas prices high so that people won't use it because they hate oil and gas and coal. And so we have a crisis now. We have an energy crisis. How pathetic is it, Chris, that we now have a president of the United States and Joe Biden has to go hand in foot to the Saudis, as he's done this week, and ask the Saudis to increase their oil and gas output because we can't produce it here in Texas and Oklahoma and North Dakota. It makes no sense. It's terrible for our national security. It's terrible for our economy. And if this keeps up, we're going to have a terrible recession.
We don't control our own destiny, and that's the point. And by the way, Mr. Biden does have a habit of putting people in charge of his administration who are not qualified. The Health and Human Services Secretary isn't even a doctor. He's the only qualification he has. He's a socialist. Mr. Chang, speaking of socialists and communists, on the foreign policy front, Biden has said not once, not twice, but 3 times the U.S. will militarily defend Taiwan if China invades. Each time his staff has had to correct him. Now, that's not normal. How is China perceiving this abnormality, the Biden administration and his socialist know-nothings in charge of his brain? How are they perceiving all of this?
I think that Beijing looks at the Biden statements and the immediate walkbacks by his subordinates as just disarray in the White House. The policymaking establishment, it needs to be consistent. Now, I happen to like what Biden said, but when you consider what his subordinates have said immediately afterwards, it indicates the United States won't defend Taiwan, and that means deterrence is breaking down, and nothing ever good happens when deterrence fails.
No, Mr. Chang, I am with you. I like what he said, but I don't like the fact that he would be there to implement it. Frankly, we would need a Ronald Reagan or a President Trump in there to actually, before we commit our fine men and women in uniform to any military engagement, we've got to have somebody who's competent. Colonel, I want to bring you in. Democrats are working to strip Americans' rights. The House is set to vote on gun restriction measures that would not have prevented the Uvalde school shooting. Punishing law-abiding Americans for the actions of criminals is not sane, much less normal, is it?
No, and let's be clear what's going on here. As Stephen already said regarding the economy, is what Gordon said on national security. This is like the underpinning of everything. The Second Amendment is what keeps us safe. So you remove that, the whole Jenga set comes crashing down, and that's what they're trying to do. Let's be perfectly clear here. Out of all of the tragedies that happen every day in America, it is all about violence created by progressive policies, not by technology. A weapon is a piece of technology. And yet, instead of putting the blame where it's supposed to be on failed policies, most of these things happen in progressively controlled cities, in areas where they have implemented gun control. Basically, what they want to do, Chris, is export to the entire country, flyover country, the failed policies in these large cities, and we cannot permit that.
You have hit the nail on the head there, Colonel, because this is what they do. Their DAs, their Soros-funded DAs, let criminals out on the streets.
That's right.
And then they blame the Constitution when their criminals start shooting up the joint. Mr. Moore, Biden says he wasn't aware of the baby formula shortage, and he wasn't aware it would be so severe. But even CNN now isn't buying his excuses. Watch this.
The FDA commissioner has already said that he will conduct a thorough investigation to make sure that we understand fully the timeline.
I don't need the FDA to investigate itself to come to the judgment that they did not act quickly enough. And on behalf of all the frustrated moms and dads and guardians out there, I hope you don't either.
Okay, so that's an abnormal example. Do you think it's caused either by incompetence or malevolence on behalf of the Biden administration? Which is it, Mr. Moore?
Well, let me start by saying that, I worked for Donald Trump as an economic advisor, and I don't recall, I don't think any of us do, any of these supply chain problems under Trump. Do you remember supply chain problems? And so now we have a supply chain problem with respect to our meat, our poultry, our as you mentioned, the baby formula. All of these things are caused by, I think, more incompetence. And let me put it like this. There's nobody in this administration right now, maybe I'm missing somebody, Chris, who knows anything about business, who knows anything about logistics. I mean, we talked about Jennifer Granholm. How about our transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg? He doesn't know anything about transportation. And this is, so in other words, if you put incompetent people in these positions, you're going to get incompetent results.
You're spot on again. Their only qualification is to be a part of the Biden administration. You have to be a left-wing socialist. That's their only qualification. And then they're in charge of all of us. And by the way, it was the great Milton Friedman who said, put government in charge of the Sahara and sand itself within 5 years would become scarce. And look at what's happening. Mr. Chang, Republican senators are sounding the alarm over China wanting to buy Forbes. Is it a good idea for the genocidal, racist, communist regime of China to own any American media? Would that be normal in any way?
Absolutely not. In 2020, the Chinese regime, both openly and surreptitiously, was encouraging and fomenting violence on American streets. That's more than just subversion, Chris. That's an act of war. We should not be allowing them to buy any media. And even if you thought violence on American streets was a good thing, there's always the issue of reciprocity. We can't own media in China. So why should China be able to own media in our country? This is absolutely wrong. And it also involves apps. We can't own apps in China. So why do they have TikTok and WeChat in our country? This is just wrong on so many different levels.
Yeah, and a message out there to the dictator Xi Jinping. Rest assured, ABC, NBC, CBS, the New York Times, and the Washington Post are doing a great job at pushing the communist agenda anyway. You really don't need to buy anything over here. Colonel, the Kremlin is warning Biden that he's adding fuel to the fire by sending rockets to Ukraine. Now, Biden's left-wing millennials, again, had to, quote, clarify that Ukraine would only receive these weapons on the condition that they wouldn't be used in Russian territory. What does our military, the rank and file, not the woke generals, what does our military rank and file think of a commander-in-chief who is always overridden by left-wing extremists in his White House?
Well, they think the same thing that I'm sure Putin thinks, that he's not competent and not capable of leading. I think that's the challenge here. As Steve Moore pointed out, Steve said, the energy issue is not Putin's, it's ours. It was a policy decision how our fit of energy production. As Gordon, the Chinese mixed signals, the Chinese are going to bet, the PRC is going to bet that while Biden says he's going to protect Taiwan, they're betting he won't because his staff walks it back constantly. Chris, the men and women of our great national security establishment have no confidence in anything the commander-in-chief now says because no one believes he's in charge. So all we see now is when you see Biden saying things regarding anything regarding Ukraine, nobody buys it. And I think that only empowers Putin because Putin believes, I think rightfully so, as do the American the service members, that they're going to be put in harm's way with no clear understanding of what that means regarding the United States' vast military capabilities. And Putin knows he's going to bet on the fact that there'll be lack of leadership when it comes time for him to take more aggressive action. That's why he's just going to wear down Ukraine. I predict, unfortunately, Ukraine's going to be eaten up slowly by Russia, and we're going to do nothing.
All right, gentlemen, I want to go 30 seconds apiece. I just want you guys to forecast as we're coming here. We're in June, for goodness sake. Who would have? I can't believe how quickly this year has gone by. Mr. Moore, give me about 30 seconds. What do you think the greatest challenge to the United States will be besides the guy who sits in the White House?
Well, I'm just so frustrated, Chris, because I honestly believe in my heart that if Donald Trump were president today, the U.S. economy would be booming, absolutely booming. And instead, we're recklessly on the verge of a recession.
Mr. Chang, how about you? The greatest challenge coming our way in the next 6 months?
That's going to be China, because you got Russia, which is being supported by China in Ukraine. You got North Korea, Iran, Algeria. They're all supported by Beijing. And we have to worry, of course, what China's going to do itself. So clearly it's China that is our number one threat. It's declared a people's war against us. What more do we need to say?
Colonel Shaffer?
I think we're looking at a complete collapse of the establishments that have maintained the momentum of the American dream. We're talking about the economics failing, national security failing, and potentially everything failing at once. This could be truly catastrophic. I hope I'm wrong, but we have to be prepared if we see the worst.
The audience here on Newsmax has just been treated to some of the most competent, some of the most intelligent men you will see talking about their respective areas of expertise. That guarantees they will never be hired in the Biden administration. Thank you very much, Stephen Moore, Gordon Chang, and Colonel Tony Shaffer. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate the time tonight.